right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for coming to Pediatric Grand Rounds today. This is a special pop-up edition before the usual September start, but we're so excited to have this. I am Dr. Erin Avonda. I am a pediatric hospitalist, and I'm also the medical director of the Primary Children's Connector Service. Today's CME claim credit is 61126. So that's 61126. Our online questions are going to go to the live chat. And for anyone in the auditorium, of course, please just raise your hand at the end and we'll use some overhead microphones that we have. So you can nominate a safety hero when you see them use the zero harm techniques that prevent harm. So please nominate safety heroes. If you want a second to do the QR code here. I'm going to introduce our speakers this morning. So we've got, let me pull up I've got all the bios here. So our first speaker is Dr. Michael A. Harris. He's a professor in pediatrics in Oregon Health and Science University and serves as chief of pediatric psychology as well as the director of the NICH program, which we're going to hear about today, which is the Novel Interventions in Children's Healthcare. Michael is nationally and internationally recognized as an expert in the psychological functioning of youth with complex and chronic health conditions. In 2011, Michael, along with Dr. Kim Spiro, who's here today, co-developed NICH, targeting the IHI's quintuple aim of reducing costs, improving care, improving health, improving clinician wellness, and improving health equity in youth with complex medical conditions who also experience a significant social burden. And then Kim Spiro is PhD, is an associate professor of pediatrics at OHSU, pediatric psychologist and co-founder and clinical director of the NICH program. She's dedicated her career to improving access to care and health outcomes for children and adolescents with chronic medical and behavioral health needs, particularly those whose ability to engage in care is affected by significant social, family, and system level changes. Dr. Spiro specializes in behavioral, family-based, and systems level interventions for children, adolescents, and young adults. Throughout her career, she's developed and adapted and implemented evidence-based programs that strengthen family functioning, improve treatment adherence, and help youth and their families successfully manage complex or chronic health conditions. In addition to supervising NICH clinicians and trainees, Dr. Spiro partners with healthcare organizations across the country to implement the NICH model while maintaining fidelity to its evidence-based approach. Ultimately, her work seeks to create sustainable systems of care that improve patient and family outcomes, reduce avoidable healthcare utilization, and help healthcare teams more effectively serve the children and families who need them most. So I will turn the time over to our speakers.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us today. I'm super excited to be here to talk with you about NICH. As you already heard, NICH is an intensive hospital to home and community-based program for kids with complex and chronic medical conditions who are living in families that have significant social and psychosocial stressors. These are patients that you guys are all aware of. They're the patients that have complex or chronic medical conditions and are repeatedly hospitalized in what would be avoidable circumstances, who are coming into the ED and oftentimes missing clinic appointments, the patients that are sitting on your floors, and sometimes you feel uncomfortable discharging because you're concerned about complications post-discharge and the family's ability to support the care plan at home. So I feel like generally everyone knows about the population that we're serving. And 2011, Michael and I met and we developed the NICH program. A little by way of context, my history, as you already heard, I've been working with really, really high needs, high risk kids for the last 30 years. I started working with kids in the juvenile justice system, kids who were high end juvenile offenders, who were sent to detention, and were incarcerated because of repeat criminal offenses, and the outcomes for those kids were not great. And kids in the foster care system who were bouncing around and ending up in residential care, and also the outcomes for those kids were not great. So these kind of the most vulnerable kids in our communities, kids that had families that were really overwhelmed with social challenges, they were slipping through the cracks. And I've spent my career trying to prevent that. The programs that we developed as I was part of a team of research scientists who developed really intensive home and community-based family-centered programs as an alternative to residential care and incarceration. And the outcomes were really, really compelling. Numerous randomized trials, and the Department of Justice actually picked up these programs as part of a blueprint series. And we were training folks nationally and internationally in systems change. How do you get the systems of care for these kids to think differently and to adapt a different and more effective way to help the most vulnerable kids? Then in 2011, I met Michael Harris, and he told me about an even more vulnerable population. These same families with really, really significant social challenges and psychosocial challenges had a child with a complex or chronic medical condition. And then he told me about the problem that he saw happening. I had actually never worked in healthcare directly. I was in mental and behavioral health previously. But what I learned about, oh, by the way, I don't have any financial disclosures. What I learned about was our patient zero. So he told me about this patient that the head of the PICU had come to him and talked about this 14-year-old girl. She had type 1 diabetes. She was diagnosed at 5 years old. She had her first DKA when she was 10, her second DKA when she was 14, and then her A1C started to deteriorate across a year's time. But then between May 2011 and February 2012, she had 12 admits for DKA to our PICU and another 10 to other local area hospitals. So the head of the PICU came to Michael, the head of pediatric psychology, and said, "We're doing everything that we can do. Our hospital has incredible social work, intensive care management, psychology consult available to these kids and families. And each time they came in, we did our best to try to engage them and get them connected to the right resources. And yet this kid kept getting sick. And he said, we got to do better. We got to do more. What we're doing isn't working, and this kid is going to die." So again, I'm telling you what you guys already know, and you guys actually have, which is really great for us, some amazing intensive care management programs here that do more than what is the typical treatment as usual. But for this population, treatment as usual in a hospital setting is when a caregiver brings a kid to a crisis in an ED, and it's the result of suboptimal adherence. So a kid with a complex or chronic medical condition, like our girl, who had 12 DKAs, not taking her insulin. What happens is providers focus a lot and stress the importance. There's a lot of education around the medical regimen, what the consequences of not following the medical regimen are, a lot of teaching and education. When this happens repeatedly, then usually social work is engaged. And when it happens again, then care management is engaged. And families, we really try hard to connect families to community resources and follow up with them to try to ensure that they're getting connected to those resources. Most of these families are Medicaid families, and we know that Medicaid is the single largest line item in most state budgets, comprising about 30% of the total population. This population is extremely expensive. When we look at the current state of affairs, we see, and this is of how Medicaid expenditures are parsed out. 83% of kids are able to get their care needs met through their PCP. That accounts for about 40% of Medicaid expenditures. 12% of the population actually needs specialty care, something beyond a PCP, and it accounts for another 12% of Medicaid expenditures. But this top 5% that need something even more, that need home health, that need care management that goes into the home, that need community health workers to try to support them. 4% of the population accounts for 23% of Medicaid expenditures, and this top 1% accounts for 25% of Medicaid expenditures. So these are really expensive patients, and what we found is this top 1%, they're still slipping through the cracks. They need something more intensive than what our systems are typically designed to do, to offer. We know that 80% of one's individual health is attributable to social factors, things like education and housing and access to food and transportation. All of those things are, we know, what actually leads to one's overall health. However, only 20% is really attributable to clinical care. But when we look at the spending to address these factors of trillions of dollars spent annually on healthcare, only 3% is actually for social needs. We understand this. It's medical care. Medical care should be for clinic-based care, except when there's a portion of the population that needs something more. So when we think about sort of like what the provider sees, and going back to our case of our 14-year-old girl, the provider sees the tip of the iceberg, and families are willing to share only so much when they come to clinic appointments. So for this girl, the provider sees the tip of the iceberg, 22 DKAs, and what the family was willing to share with our social workers and psychologists. This girl is definitely drowning, 22 DKAs. And this is our Titanic, which is our state-of-the-art medical system with all of the most advanced technology, and everyone doing their best to try to address the needs of everyone that we serve. And when NICH got involved, this patient was referred to NICH. We started NICH in 2011 with this patient. What we found after building a relationship with the family was that this was a single mother living in a car, unemployed, with mental health issues, her own chronic health problems. This girl's father was incarcerated. There was food insecurity. They had one phone. This girl had no access to diabetes technology. She was not in school. She was staying home taking care of her younger siblings while they were couch surfing. She was using drugs and alcohol, and they had already had 2 reports to Child Protective Services for medical neglect. And I'm not sure if it's any different in Utah, but our experience is if you are a 14-year-old kid who has type 1 diabetes, the foster care system is not for you. There are no foster homes that want to take this kid. And so these kids are generally left in the care of their parents, and CPS closed the case 2 times. So this is my Titanic sinking. It doesn't matter how great this and state-of-the-art our healthcare system is for this population. When you actually hit the base of this iceberg, there really aren't services that are designed to meet these families and take care of those things. So the problem with treatment, as usual, is that so many families are dealing with these intergenerational cycles of poverty and abuse, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, these social barriers and systemic barriers, insurance barriers, language barriers. And these families have experienced a lot of discrimination, marginalization, blame, and judgment, which leads to distrust in the healthcare system, which then becomes another barrier to care for these patients. So the care as usual cycle continues where the kid keeps getting sick, like this young girl, and caregivers would bring her in a crisis. The patient is treated, providers focus on the education, social work is engaged. We do our best to try to connect these families with community services, and then the families don't follow up with all of the community services. Or the home visiting programs that happen once every 2 weeks are not intensive enough to actually lead to sustainable change for this family. These families are living in survival mode. Acuity drives action. When you're wondering how you're going to feed your children, where you're going to sleep that night, how you can keep your family safe, can you keep your phone on, then the child's health moves down on your priority list. Not because parents don't care. They care tremendously, but they're living in fight or flight, literally. And it's very, very hard to actually engage and access the services that are available. And this is the gap between hospital and home and community resources. And so far, our experience is there are no great programs that are intensive enough to support this population. So who are these youth? You already know these youth. These are the ones that keep you up at night, that you worry about, again, discharging because you're worried about what happens when they go home. These are the patients that actually don't make it to all of their appointments, that don't fill prescriptions, that come into the ED when they could have had care at a different level if they had engaged sooner. And these are the patients that actually are really swimming in these social challenges. So when we look at the science and care, what does the science say about treating this population? There actually isn't a lot of science for treating this population because they're excluded from our clinical trials. When you don't speak the language, when you don't have access to tech, when you can't transport to and from, and you aren't always answering your phone, this actually, you don't get included in randomized trials. And Michael wrote a paper in 2017, your exclusion is our inclusion. So this is our population, and we actually are conducting research on them. And when we look at care, I think everyone in hospitals nowadays is really trying hard to figure out a model of care for this population. Everyone worries about these. They burn out providers, these patients, they burn out providers. And what we do is really, in our hospital, we try to put more bodies on them. Our intensive care coordination model has nurses, social workers, psychologists that all go into the home. They all have a different role, but these families are really overwhelmed with more. So they actually sometimes put up walls and stop answering the phone. It's too many people, and more without a really comprehensive model of care doesn't actually lead to effective change for some. The good news is that you've all heard about value-based care. The systems are moving towards more value-based care. Right now, we have not yet shifted that way, but that's the buzzword and that's the direction things are going, which is great, and that's a huge opportunity. The core elements of value-based care are involved in the quintuple aim, which is what our model was specifically designed to address. Again, improving health, improving care, reducing costs, reducing provider burnout and strain, and improving health equity. And even the Center for Medicaid Services is really focused right now. There's recognition at that level for developing appropriate services and support for children with complex, chronic, and complex social needs. So what is NICH? NICH is designed for the highest risk, highest need, highest cost kids. And interestingly enough, you can actually develop a program that meets the quintuple aim and saves money, which is so great. You can get the good health outcomes and you can save money. So we modeled NICH after the ICU. So when kids come to the ICU, they get the highest level of care. They come into the ED, and whatever they need, they have access to. But when kids come and they have really significant and complex social challenges, we usually start with the lowest level of care. We usually start with telephonic support. And then if it happens again, then they might get a little more problem solving with social work and connection to community resources. And then if it happens again, then we get intensive care coordination. But what NICH did is we actually matched the intensity of the intervention with the degree of need. And our model for care for social complexity is designed after the model of care in the ICU. So again, NICH was designed to address the quintuple aim. We have really compelling outcomes across all 5, and Michael's going to be talking about that a little later. It's an intensive intervention program that addresses the social drivers of health because we have to make sure families' basic needs are met before we can actually do the work of skills training families. And that's the other big part of our program. Our model is we do it for you, we do it with you, We support you doing it yourself until you can do it yourself. And we are able to do this because we are an APM, an alternative payment method contract. We do NICH for 1 year. And within that year, we do not have to bill for every service, which allows us an incredible amount of flexibility to be able to skills train. Michael and I are pediatric psychologists. We are experts in behavior change. And so we incorporate a lot of behavioral intervention while we are simultaneous behavioral intervention that targets adherence, parent training, communication training, navigating the healthcare system, while we are also addressing those social drivers of health. We are embedded in hospital and bridge to the home, which is critical because a lot of community-based um, uh, home health programs, they don't actually integrate well with specialty care because the hospital is hard to actually penetrate. This is our model, and I'm getting the 5-minute warning, so I'm gonna have to talk really, really fast, but I tend to talk fast, so I'm just gonna pick it up a bit. Okay, our model is that we actually, a lot of these services are available to families, but they are so overwhelmed that they can't connect with them. What NICH does is real-time, 24/7, one person for 1 year. We don't supplant other services. We actually support families in engaging in those services by walking side by side with them. Our interventionists is the name of the role of the people who provide it. They are social chameleons. They move seamlessly between going to clinic appointments with patients and then actually helping translate care plans into the home. We, again, are 24/7 because problems happen outside the regular workday, and we're there to proactively problem solve with families. We removed all the barriers. We can drive patients in our cars. We have flexible spending to take care of emergent needs. We can text them, so we can send prompts and reminders. And again, this is all with a psychological lens of behavior change, an incredible amount of encouragement and reinforcement. Lastly, I'll give you an example of one of our patients. This is Lucas. He's a 15-year-old male with chronic kidney disease. He is a single mom who had her own health conditions. They had actually fled another state where she was involved in interpersonal violence. They were living off SSI, previously houseless. He had suboptimal adherence, and he had stage 4 kidney disease. The team came to us basically referring to NICH saying, we're like at a crossroads. He's either going to end up on long-term dialysis, or we have to engage him in talking about his interest in a transplant. He was refusing all conversations about transplant, wouldn't even meet with the team about that, and was fighting with his mom a lot about that. And so he was, and he had suboptimal adherence, and his labs weren't looking good. Because we have a year, we spent the first 3 months building a relationship with this kid. We assigned an interventionist who actually took him out and played sports, got to know him. He opened up about his fears and concerns and about why he was in conflict with his mom. We did an incentive-based intervention. He wanted to earn going to sports camps, so the interventionist set up where he had to increase his water intake. They each got a water bottle. They texted pictures of themselves throughout the day, back and forth, of them drinking water. Then he earned points for taking his meds daily, which then he earned going to a sports camp. The education appointment was scheduled. The nephrology team was ecstatic because it had been going on for months that there were growing concerns. The team was thrilled. And then the weekend before, mom's car breaks down, weekend before the medical appointment. But in NICH, we are 24/7. Mom reached out to the interventionist and she said, my car broke down, I don't know what to do. And the interventionist jumped into action and he said, we're gonna get your car towed for you. Let's bring it to a mechanic. Let's figure this out. He called me and said, the mechanic can only see her on Saturday and I wanna go down there and see if I can talk the mechanic down to try to get a better deal. And I actually am gonna have my kids with me that day. And I don't know what to do. Can I bring my kids to this appointment? And I said, well, we don't have a lot of boundaries in NICH, but no, you actually can't bring your kids. But our implementation and dissemination lead who is in this room, this is part of our culture of our model. Anyone on the team would have jumped in. It was a Saturday and she said, I'll take your kids. I'll take them out for ice cream so you can go meet this mom. So she did. This is her and her husband taking the boys out for ice cream while this interventionist on a Saturday took mom to go meet the mechanic. Ended up that the mechanic bill was going to be $4,000. This family could not afford that. Joseph, the interventionist, reached out to Michael, the program director, and said, "Can I access foundation funds for getting this car fixed?" Michael said, "My neighbor is a mechanic. Let's get the car towed and see if he can give us a deal." And because we tell the story of our patients, this mechanic ended up fixing the car for $1,500. This is Joseph, our interventionist. This is the mom of that kid driving away in her car, which Michael's neighbor fixed. So I will just say the nephrology team was ecstatic. He made it to his education appointment. His labs are looking so much better even after 3 months, and he is on his way to be listed for a transplant, which is phenomenal. So just to say, over my 30 years, I have learned that systems were not really designed well to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. There are no shortcuts. What we do is extremely nuanced, and it is tailored to the unique needs of every family. But now we know more about what works. And I think the challenge before all of us in all healthcare systems is a willingness to act on what we know now, to invest differently and work differently and build new systems that are capable of reaching the ones that need us the most. And I'll just say it can be done. We have a team for 15 years at OHSU. We get 250 to 300 referrals a year of kids whose needs are not being met by our most intensive services. And so it can be done, and we have disseminated to UCSF and Stanford. So we also know how to train others to do it. And the maths, and it's not girl math. And so I'm passing this off to Michael, and he's going to talk about our outcomes.
I told Kim when she said she was going to say the maths, and it's not girl math, that she had to say that I couldn't say that. My daughter's actually said that to me when she's come home with new clothes. And I've said, "Where did this come from, Rachel?" And she said, "Well, it's girl math, Dad. Don't worry about it." All right, so I'm going to talk about the outcomes. As Kim has said multiple times, we're aligning our outcomes with the quintuple aim. The IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, was established by Don Berwick, a physician. It's interesting. It started out as the triple aim, reducing costs, improving care, improving health. And then they decided to add the quadruple aim, which was interesting. We've got to take care of our providers, so provider wellness. And it's not ironic, it's just sad that the last aim was to improve health inequities. So does NICH reduce costs? So the bars on your left are our pre and post NICH expenditures for all kids that we serve. You can see that and these are Medicaid dollars. So you can see that the average cost of our kids in terms of total expenditures in the year prior to NICH is about $65,000 or $60,000. And then the reduction during NICH goes down to about $20,000. So a huge reduction in costs. So in working with our payer partners, they brought up the issue of, well, what about the outliers? Which I found like ridiculous because the program is serving the outliers. That's what we do. So I entertained his ridiculous comment and I said, okay, we'll take out who do you want us to take out? So of course wanted a NEF kid who was transplanted out, which was once again interesting. So we'll take him out. And then we ran the numbers again. We took another one out that they didn't want us to include. And clearly still we're doing a great job of reducing costs and able to demonstrate that value. We've been able to match control. We don't have a randomized control, but we were able to match control patients who've been served by NICH and patients who've been referred to NICH but not served. So the way our system works is that we contract with Medicaid for the services. Not all our Medicaid partners in the state of Oregon, there's 15 entities, which is just ridiculous. They make a decision about whether they want to contract for NICH services. And so although all the kids who get referred to NICH definitely need NICH, we can't serve all of them. And so we have a natural control group because, once again, we can't serve everybody. This is just type 1 kids, and the reason I have this data up, not because NICH is all about type 1, it's because that's our largest population, and so that makes our most compelling data. And as you can see, 12 months out before NICH, both the control and the NICH population are spending at the same rate. And then you can see after NICH and then down the road 3 years out that clearly there's a huge difference between the NICH patients served and those who are not served. Those are just a couple of small kind of pieces of our financial data, but trust me, we have a lot more financial data that shows the value in terms of reducing costs. But obviously, we're in this for other reasons. What about improving health? Once again, these are type 1 kids. I'll say it again, it's because we have the largest population of type 1, and it allows us to show value beyond 5 patients or 10 patients. This is probably almost 100 patients. But this is remarkable in terms of improving health. Look at the reductions in diabetes admissions, DKA admissions, PICU contact. I mean, we're cutting these things in half from the year prior to the year during. These are 3 kids with failure to thrive. And as everybody knows, ZBMI is a very stable metric, and it's hard to move. And so we were able to track these 3 young people a year prior to NICH, and then time 0 is the beginning of NICH. And you can see all the trajectories on their weight continue to increase, which is, once again, a pretty remarkable outcome just in a year's time. So once again, these are just touching on the health data that we have. We have a lot more health data across all our health conditions that we serve to show our value in improving health. How about improving care? So when we thought about improving care, we wanted to get away from what a lot of people do is they do satisfaction measures, like how satisfied are the providers or how satisfied are the patients with the care that they're receiving. We wanted to see, are there care differences? Are there changes in the quality of care? So we actually developed our own measure of care. And what we found is across the board, we're seeing reports of improvement from care from parents and patients, and also from providers. So here's the quality of communication between the family and the providers. The parent is reporting post-NICH a huge improvement in communication between the team and the family, and the providers are also showing the same improvement. How about level of coordination of services? Once again, they're showing a huge improvement. Both the parents and the providers are showing the same change. And then these are quite remarkable that we're seeing both providers and families, as well as patients who can fill this measure out, that caregivers are more involved in the child's care. More time is being discussed during clinic visits around progress that the family's making. I think Kim kind of highlighted these families have been marginalized by our healthcare system, not because we're bad people or trying to undermine them. It's just because we get frustrated, it's hard, and then clinic visits become about what's not being done. And so to change the narrative, we've been able to help pre-teach physicians and nurses and other healthcare providers to engage in conversations around what's working. Better attendance at outpatient visits, higher quality of communication, and providers are much better informed about what the true challenges are. So as Kim said, when families come into the institution, and it's very much probably like yours, is that they're hesitant about telling us the real story, what's really going on. We need to know the real story. Providers need to know the real story so they can map on a treatment plan that really could be successful given the true life challenges a family's having. But they won't tell it because they're scared. So these are also match control data to show improvements in care. These are ED visits. Once again, a year prior, and those served, those not served. During the first year of NICH, you can start seeing they start to separate. 3 years in, you start to see a greater separation in the number of ED visits, the controls having many more, and then you can see the total is just really remarkable. So while this isn't a huge cost savings in terms of the institution, getting kids out of our EDs who don't belong there is a really important thing for our institution. When I walk down to the ED occasionally to see a patient, it's just a mess. and they don't need more challenges to have to deal with. And having a kid with, say, CF or end-stage renal disease who's using the ED for a bloody nose or a sprained ankle, which is really what they're doing instead of going to their PCP. So once again, just a little bit of our data on improving care. What about clinician wellness? So we don't have a measure specifically of clinician wellness, but there's always rumors over the past 15 years that NICH is going to close its doors. And we actually felt like it was going to close its doors over the 15 years multiple times. But one time, unbeknownst to us, our physician colleagues and nurse colleagues who work with this population heard this rumor. It started to pick up a lot of speed. We did not know what was going on. And there was about 100 healthcare providers submitted testimonials like, don't do this, don't close the doors on this. This is too important to us as healthcare providers. It's changed the nature of care, it's changed our system, and it's just changed the work environment. But I will say that we do get reports that providers are less frustrated with the limitations of taking care of patients who are in NICH because they have another set of hands, another set of eyes, and that they're not lawyers to patients, they're not psychologists to patients, they're not friends to patients, they're not educators to patients. They're doctoring and nursing patients, which is what they want to do, and that's what they were trained to do. And so we're taking care of the rest. We know that provider quality of life is really important and that burnout costs institutions a lot of money. We were presenting this data at Stanford, where we have one of our sites, and the COO, we kind of blew through this data. We didn't really show a lot of attention to it, and he asked us to move back and show how we were changing these things in terms of quality of life for providers, in terms of our care model. And what I came to understand is that from beginning to end, losing a physician and then onboarding a physician and then getting them up and running is a pretty big chunk of change. And so retaining quality healthcare providers in a system is a cost savings. During COVID-19, we didn't skip a beat. We were in the community, and as everybody knows, these are the families who got hit the hardest because these were the essential workers, bus drivers, grocery store workers, right? These are the people who were expected to go to work. They lived in close proximity to other families in a very small space. Oftentimes, like grandparents were immunocompromised. You had a child with a health concern. It was just a mess, but we continued to serve the population successfully. And we hopefully make healthcare providers' time with patients more efficient because then they're able to kind of provide care in the way that they were trained to provide care. And they're not distracted by or having to manage these other things that aren't part of healthcare. And then lastly, I'll talk about reducing health disparities. So remarkably, Oregon is one of the whitest states in the country. The Black population in the state of Oregon is 2%. In Portland, it's 5%. And if you look at these data, almost half of the kids in NICH in Oregon are kids of color. In the Bay Area, it's about 96% kids of color. And so we are really tapping it. We believe we're really tapping into the most vulnerable because we know that youth of color have some of the biggest systemic barriers. So we wanted to see, are we reducing health disparities? And so you can see these data pre-NICH and post-NICH. And so we have white youth served by NICH, BIPOC youth served by NICH, and BIPOC youth that were not served, okay? And these are all their clinic attendance appointments. So you can see before NICH, the white youth in NICH were having the highest clinic attendance. And then after NICH, what's remarkable is the NICH BIPOC population has the highest clinical attendance. There's no difference between the white and BIPOC group, but to see that change is the best data that we have to show that we are actually moving the needle on health disparities. What's sad is that the unserved BIPOC youth continue to languish and continue to no-show and cancel appointments and not be in clinics. We're also a rural state, very much like Utah. And so there's 4+ million people in the state of Oregon. About 1.2 million are Medicaid covered. So about a quarter of the population is Medicaid covered. And so a lot of these people, the only academic medical centers in Portland, which is at the top of the state, people have to drive for specialty care 5.5 hours. A flight for life, oftentimes from Southern Oregon, could be $30,000. And as you can see, we compared yearly admissions in our urban youth to yearly admissions in our rural youth, and the changes continue to hold up in terms of improvements. Fewer admissions, both in our urban and rural youth. So we feel like in terms of health disparities beyond race, that our rural population is benefiting just as much from the service. So I get this question, not from healthcare providers, and I won't get it from any of you because I know you're smart enough not to ask the question, what about regression to the mean? And we were having this conversation this morning, what bothers me about this is if you provide health care to this population, what magically happens that changes things for these kids that somehow it was just a peak in utilization and then they regress back to baseline? That's just a ridiculous idea, right? But people who are involved in statistics want to know about this. This is an N of 1, mind you. We did publish this in a journal. This was a Kaiser kid, ASD and type 1 diabetes, both. And at the second DKA, I went to the payer who we have a contract with, and I said, I'm concerned. These are the social factors. This is now his second DKA. Kaiser said, no, we got internal intensive case management. We got this. 14 DKAs later, they engaged in a contract. 14 DKAs later. So who takes the hit here? It's the kid, right? Potential cerebral edema. This kid could potentially never be the same because they waited for regression to the mean. He had one hospitalization during NICH that was not diabetes related. It was something other. And we followed him out 3 years and he had no further DKAs. That's an N of 1. This is an N of about 85. And what we're able to show here is that a year prior to the referral, we can look at all the markers of high-end utilization, and then they get referred to wait list, right? And you can see utilization goes up, and then they get into NICH and utilization goes down, and then they're discharged from NICH and utilization goes down. And so, mind you, when they're on the wait list, they're not told they're on the wait list. So there was no reason to believe that they would be doing anything differently. What this data shows is when you have an institution that has a program like NICH, you all know these patients before they become these patients, right? You know the wheels of the bus are going to fall off. You just don't know when. And so now that we have NICH at OHSU, all our providers are referring, knowing these patients very well. They're very concerned. Maybe the spend has not peaked yet, and maybe the health outcomes have not reduced yet, but they're waiting for it. They refer, they're exactly right. And that's what these data show. We've implemented successfully at Stanford and UCSF, and we're funded heavily by the Helmsley Charitable Trust over the past maybe 10 years. We've reached national attention. While NICH is not specifically for kids with diabetes, we entered the Innovation Challenge at the American Diabetes Association. There were 60 applicants. They picked 6 finalists. The 6 finalists did a talk, 5 minutes in front of the audience, in front of 3 judges, and we won. How cool is that? And you can guess that all the other Innovation Challenge participants were doing like biotech, high-end, like implanting sacks of insulin in people's skin. I mean, stuff that just is crazy. We got this little program that's addressing the social needs of families, and yeah, that was really cool. That then propelled us into having an international presence. We were asked to be a part of Startup Health's Moonshot, and so we've been participating in that. That's 35 entrepreneurs and innovators across the world who are trying to solve the problem of type 1 diabetes. And then most recently, we were just awarded ISPAD, the International Society for Pediatric and Adolescent Diabetes Innovation Prize, which we'll accept in Rio de Janeiro in November. So you heard all this stuff, and you're like, why is this not everywhere? And so all those dots, except for the red ones, are places where I have been, and Kim has been, and others have been, giving grand rounds, meeting with leadership, people who've been interested. But the red dots are the only places where it exists. And so the question is why? And I think Kim came back to or mentioned this early in her part of her talk. medical centers are set up to provide medical care. That's what we do best. And this is all about addressing the social needs of our patient population. And so while they love it and they're compelled by the data and they love the cost savings, to wrap your brain around doing this kind of work, texting patients, driving patients, you know, having an interventionist, have one of our staff member watch an interventionist kids and have me ask the neighbor to fix somebody's car. I mean, it's just, the system is not built that way, and our healthcare system in particular is pretty outdated. And I have a smiley face there in Utah because I feel good. We've had plenty of funders and partners, Startup Health. Once again, Leona M. and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust has been a huge partner. American Diabetes Association, Breakthrough T1D, and we partnered with our Ronald McDonald House. So what about going without NICH? We have a 12-year-old. This is a different patient than the one we talked about. The year prior to the referral, his A1C was about 12%, which is quite high. He was in the custody of his elderly grandparents, lived in rural Oregon. Grandmother was bedbound. He had 4 DKA admissions, 20 days in the hospital. Peds endo was involved. I was involved. I knew this kid, social situation. We threw everything that we had at them, right? We approached the payer because remember there's 15 different entities, and they said, no, we're good. You know, just keep doing the same thing. Grandfather had an acute medical crisis, life flighted to Portland, and the youth was left in the care of his grandmother. And this happened. It's avoidable, avoidable. So our sustainability journey, we've been looking at diversifying and moving into a braided funding model as opposed to putting all our chips in one basket. We're looking for mission fit partners. And so this talk is kind of the culmination of working with who we believe as mission fit partners, and that is your institution and the others that are involved in this, working with this population. To us, that's a really important piece, that an institution is already invested in caring for this population. Had big impact clinically, had a big impact research-wise, published over 10 journal articles. We continue to publish more. Probably our grant funding has been upwards about $6 million. We're educating the next generation of healthcare providers. We're residency rotation. We're a medical 3rd and 4th year medical student rotation, 8 weeks. And then we've been fortunate enough to be given a number of awards. This is our staff. As you can see, they're quite diverse. They're young. They're incredibly bright. They're incredibly gifted. And the work can't get done without these people. It's not me and Kim who are responsible for this. It's the frontline staff who take care of our patients, who take their kids to have another staff member watch them, to take care of our most vulnerable. So this is on my door. You guys know the MLK quote, but we take it to heart, and we'll continue down this journey until we don't have any more patients to see. We want to be out of business. We want to be out of business. We want the system to take care of these kids. Thank you very much, and Kim and I will take whatever questions you have.
They could just, there's oversight.
Oh, their mic's overhead.
Awesome.
Awesome.
You guys, thank you for being here, and thanks for your work. We've had a few conversations. I think most of us are pretty inspired by this, and we recognize the need that this is filling, and it's quite bewildering to not have anything to do about it. Question for you is, what are some ways in which NICH is failing? And what are some opportunities, what are the gaps, and what are the next steps for you all in your work, not only to spread, but in your work at your organizations? Where are the challenges?
Any thoughts about that? Do you have some? So, Kim will tell people that we don't bat 1,000, that maybe 700. These are really, really hard families. These are long-standing intergenerational challenges. And so we see it as a failure when we can't serve a child successfully, regardless. And we actually had this conversation. We do a group case review every week where we review all our both wins as well as challenging cases. And we talked at length about the families who we're not successfully serving and how we can adapt, change the model. And we take it very seriously that, we don't, while you saw the data and it's pretty exciting, we spend a lot more time thinking about how we're failing and when we're not meeting the needs of a family that needs us. And that's being not well served by our healthcare system. So I think there's lots of other areas that we have learned and we have failed early on, and over the years of continuing to do the work, we've improved. One of the areas was we were doing too much for families. We were not skilling them up, and so we actually had a kid who was being served by, he was a type 1 kid, one of our star interventionists. He became like a father figure to this kid, and we didn't spend enough time skilling up the family and the kid to manage successfully, and we discharged him from the program because he was doing so well. And he was in DKA, 2 weeks later because he missed being a part of the program. And that was just an eye-opener. That was like, wow, we really missed the boat on that one. And so we started.
That was a long time ago. I've since and how we can actually teach them how to support their kids. So again, our model is very much based on scaffolded teaching across a year so that parents can actually take over the interventions that we're using. It's not rocket science, but it's something that folks have to learn. And it takes a lot of practice. You can't teach a family a thing and then go and do it. So we've gotten much better at that.
I would say another place that we have failed, and we continue to struggle with this, is that we always thought the most compelling, while this is really not a cost savings program or a revenue generation program, we're doing this because we believe in the importance of good health care for everybody and that these children deserve the highest level of care. But we've led with the money as the most compelling piece, and I think we forgot about telling the story and putting a human face on the kids that we see and the families that we care for. And we get caught up in the math, frankly, and that's been a mistake because usually the people who want to hear more about the math can outmath us. And so that's not what we do, and that's not why we're doing this.
I'll also say we learned that we were burning out our providers, so our interventionists who work 24/7, and I would say they get one weekend off a month. They are not on call. They do active coaching and support, but they don't want their phone shut off. They don't want to have a weekend off a month. So even though we tell them your life comes first and you do not have to answer every text, we literally have to take their phones away from them because they want to be there for their families, and they're getting burned out. And so now we do 6-month wellness checks, and we've changed our model to have once a week they get time together that's just social time, and once a month they have a 2-hour brunch together that's just social time, and we do a lot of things that focus on provider wellness. And now it went from our average length of employment for our interventionists was 2.5 years to now everybody stays. So we have interventionists that have been there for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So it's great. We figured that out, and that has a lot to do with a very supportive team culture.
Second part of your question, would you repeat it, please? We could talk about our failures all day, so.
What's next? Like, as you guys have generated so much insight over 15 years, obviously you're looking to spread and scale. Are there innovations you're thinking about in the program
Yes.
at your own institution that
Yeah.
you'd like to?
Great question, yeah. So the innovations that we're currently doing is we're pivoting a little bit around pre-surgical and post-surgical cases. So, you know,
New service line.
so 3 months out, we're identifying young people, young adults who are in line for some sort of surgery, and they have a lot of social challenges going on, and it's causing a lot of gumming up of the system, a lot of time getting people ready, and then by the time they're ready for surgery, they're not ready. They're either not prepped right or something's wrong, and so you have a surgeon standing there without anything to do. And then, as you know, the way the payment system works, at least in Oregon, is you get the money for the surgery, and so the post-surgical care is really important to make sure that they manage post-surgically how they're supposed to do it. And so we're working with our surgery team, both on the adult and ped side, to adapt this model for just a 3-month pre-surgical, 3-month post-surgical follow-up. Reducing complications post-surgically, making sure the show rate increases for surgery patients. We've also expanded to 18 to 30-year-olds called NICH Launch, the transition population, which we see as highly vulnerable, probably more vulnerable than our pediatric population. And so we've adapted the model. Kim adapted it with one of our adult psychologists to accommodate the transition population. They are a very different population, and they're actually causing more challenges on the adult side of the hospital than the peds kids that we serve on the ped side of the hospital. Like, they're in the hospital for 200 days. They're untethered. They may be partnered up, but their partners oftentimes have their own challenges. Sometimes they're employed, sometimes they're not. And then they're managing a health condition. And so that's another way that we've expanded and grown and changed the model a little bit to accommodate different populations. We're also looking to disseminate to internationally. We've had some interest from the folks in Rwanda specifically, and so we've had some meetings at international conferences with some folks from Partners in Health that work actively in sub-Saharan Africa. And so we've been having those conversations. Kristen, our dissemination lead, was just down in California meeting with some of them. We're going to meet with them again in Rio. And we believe that this is a model that could be adapted for other countries. When I've presented this at other conferences internationally, I've been approached by people from Sweden and Germany and completely different healthcare systems who have this population and are interested in possibly doing something with it. Yes.
What do you do? I feel like the funding part that you talked about was Medicaid, billing Medicaid. What do you do about uninsured or patients that aren't Medicaid patients for funding?
Yeah, so the business model is a braided funding model, and so we have several avenues to get funding for this. The hospital actually benefits from the service. We've had our hospital analysts run the data, and it shows that, like, reducing length of stay saves money on the hospital side. As you know, most of the dollars that are spent on a patient, especially a Medicaid patient, happen within the first 48 to 72 hours of a hospitalization, and we're not getting anything. People aren't discharging these kids because they're going to bounce right back and they're concerned about their social issues. And then backfilling beds, the backfill rate, we have data on that and how much money, revenue generation of getting kids out of beds, getting them home, supporting them, and then backfilling with maybe a commercial payer. And then we have other service grants that we've received to serve this population. There are foundations within the state of Oregon that are very interested in their community. We have Coos and Curry County, which is on the south coast of Oregon, very rural, a lot of poverty, really not really close to anything, any resources and services. And so there's a foundation there that actually has employed an interventionist for the past 4 years because they're so committed to their community and wanting to keep all their kids healthy and safe.
Thank you.
Yes.
Super quick, can you tell us about the level of training for the intensivists, how you find these people, how you train them? I know there's not a lot of time, I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, everybody asks about that.
Yep.
So our interventionists, we say we hire for attitude and we train for skill. They have a variety of different backgrounds. Some of them have masters in public health, some of them have associate degrees in education. Some of them have been Starbucks baristas or Trader Joe's checkers. So we are looking for people who actually have really outstanding social skills, who, you know, we need these families who actually have been judged and blamed to want to be willing to take the call and open their home. And so They're kind of social justice warriors, and we provide really intensive upfront and ongoing training. They get intensive upfront, and then they get 2 hours of individual supervision a week and 2 hours of group supervision. And it takes, honestly, a year to a year and a half before you can really do this well. But because we have this really intensive supervision model, our supervisors are on call 24/7 to the interventionists, and initially, we're telling them what to do and what to say in every interaction.
Tim says we hire for attitude, train for skill.
Yeah.
If the attitude's not there, like, we want first responders. We want people who aren't gonna run into burning buildings. We want people who are gonna problem solve and think about what's the best approach here. We also draw from people who have a lived experience. Many of our interventionists have their own chronic health conditions and have walked that walk. We have, we've had a couple of interventionists who are DACA. So we love people who've had a very rich kind of life, and how they use that to manage the rest of their work.
I know we're short on time. Have the other sites that have implemented your program had the same success rate with hiring people and having?
It's part of our implementation model, we help you. We have a very, very clearly articulated implementation model. So we have job descriptions, we participate in the interviews, we help you pick the people, so, because we know what they look like.
We actually published an article that answered that question. And so we took our 2 sites, Stanford and UCSF, and we looked at all the data, and we were able to show that the trajectory of skills development and the outcomes all started to move forward just as they have in Oregon.
Fantastic. I think we've got to end here. I'm sorry we won't make it to the questions in the chat, but the claim credit code for everybody is 61126. And thank you so much to the NICH team for coming and speaking to us about their program. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Maybe coming to a theater near you soon.